So, back in late 2025, the UK and the US shook hands on this massive pharmaceuticals deal. And, on the face of it, it looks like a huge win for the British economy. But when you start to dig a little deeper, you find this hidden cost, and it's a cost that could land right on the doorstep of the NHS. So today, we're going to unpack this real double-edged sword of a deal.
I mean, just listen to that. That one sentence right there. It just cuts through all the complicated economic talk and gets straight to the heart of it, doesn't it? The human cost. This whole debate, it's not really about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the incredibly tough choices our healthcare system, the NHS, might have to make. So, what is the real price of this deal? Let's get into it.
All right, so let's back up a bit. How did we even get here? To really get a grip on the impact of this deal, we've got to look at how this whole thing came together in the first place.
What's pretty wild is just how fast this all happened. It kicked off with this big general economic pact in May 2025, and bam, by December, it's a very specific pharma deal. But here's the detail you've really got to pay attention to. That end date, 2028. This thing only lasts for 3 years. And that detail is absolutely crucial. It basically starts a ticking clock on the whole arrangement.
So what this all boils down to is a really simple but incredibly powerful trade-off. The US was basically threatening to slap these crippling tariffs on UK pharma exports, and to make that threat disappear, the UK agreed to open up its checkbook and promise the NHS would spend a lot more money on new, innovative, and often expensive medicines. It's a classic case of political leverage, really.
Okay, this table here really gets into the nuts and bolts of the deal. So, first thing, that big tariff threat, gone. But in return, NICE, that's the UK's drug watchdog, the body that decides which drugs are value for money, they have to raise their spending limit. Think of it as the maximum price tag the NHS is willing to pay for 1 year of good health for a patient. By raising that limit, they're essentially giving the green light to more expensive drugs. And then, here's the real kicker. Those rebates that drug companies usually pay back to the NHS, they get capped at a much lower rate. And what does that mean? Well, it means more of the bill gets passed straight to the taxpayer.
Okay, so we've seen what the UK had to give up. Now let's talk about what they got in return. Why was this deal so tempting for them in the first place? Let's look at the huge economic upside.
£6.6 billion. Let that sink in for a second. That's how much the UK's pharma exports to the US are worth every single year. So this deal is basically a giant shield, protecting this absolutely vital stream of money from getting totally wiped out by tariffs. When you're talking about a number that big, you can start to see why the UK government felt they had to make a move, and make it fast.
And look, protecting that $6.6 billion, that has a massive knock-on effect across the whole economy. We're talking about safeguarding more than 100,000 jobs. We're talking about protecting a huge chunk of the UK's trade surplus. And on top of all that, it gives UK companies a real leg up on their rivals in the EU. The big bet the government is making here is that all of this will help turn the UK into a magnet for life sciences investment from all over the world.
And, right away, it looked like that bet might actually be paying off. Almost immediately after the deal was signed, the pharma giant Bristol Myers Squibb announced they were pumping £500 million of new investment into the UK. This is exactly what the government was hoping for. But as we're about to see, this big economic win came with a very, very significant trade-off.
All right, so let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this deal. Because while the economic argument looks pretty solid, there's a growing number of experts out there who are sounding some serious alarm bells about what this means for the NHS.
£3 billion. That's the extra bill every single year that the NHS is now expected to pay for these new medicines. For a health service that is already stretched to its absolute limit, that is a staggering amount of money.
And just to put that £3 billion into perspective for you, what does that actually buy? Well, it's about the same as the cost of hiring 30,000 new nurses. Or you could use it to build 20 brand new hospitals. When you see it like that, you start to understand the brutal real-world choices that NHS leaders are now facing.
So, where's the real pressure point in all this? It's the huge risk to generic medicines. Now, generic drugs, these are the affordable, off-patent ones, they're basically the backbone of the NHS. Just look at this. They make up 85% of all prescriptions, but they only account for 15% of the drug budget. They are, without a doubt, the foundation of an affordable healthcare system.
And this is where the real worry comes in. An expert in this field, Catherine Drew, points out a huge risk. She's basically saying that by forcing the NHS to prioritize these super expensive new drugs, the deal could make the UK market completely unprofitable for the companies that make the cheap, generic ones. And if they decide to just pack up and leave, the NHS would lose its single biggest tool for saving money.
Dr. Andrew Hill from the University of Liverpool puts it in really stark, practical terms. He says that inside the NHS budget, everything is a zero-sum game. Every single pound spent on an expensive new drug is a pound you can no longer spend on a doctor's salary, on a new ambulance, or on a simple, cheap procedure that could save someone's life.
So, there you have it. A huge win for the economy on one side, and a potential crisis for the healthcare system on the other. How on earth do you balance those two things?
Well, you can really break this whole conflict down into 3 simple steps. First, you have the win. The deal protects the UK's pharma industry from a total disaster. Then you have the cost. It puts the NHS budget under incredible strain. And finally, you have the big unknown. The fact that this deal is just a temporary fix. It only lasts 3 years, which means the really tough negotiations are still to come.
So if you take away just 3 things from all this, let it be these. 1, UK pharma exports are now safe and secure, which is huge. 2, this comes at a price, putting immense pressure on the NHS budget and forcing some really difficult choices. And 3, and this is maybe the most important part, this is all temporary. It creates this cliff edge in a few years, setting the stage for another round of high-stakes talks.
So, at the end of the day, the UK has bought itself 3 years of stability for one of its most important industries. But in doing so, it might have set a very expensive precedent for the future. And that leaves us with the big, lingering question. This deal only lasts 3 years. What's the price of the next handshake going to be?